Mine is just one story, and there are 100,000 other stories. Each story is different. Each pain is different. I was fortunate not to have painful memories, but there are a lot of people who have had very painful experiences. Mine is not the average story. Mine is one of the maybe luckier stories of a childhood behind bars.
Children and adults who were born and raised in the United States were locked in internment camps on American soil solely because they were of Japanese descent. This happened during World War II. While the soldiers who fought in this war and the Rosie the Riveters who were their lifeline on the home front are hailed as the greatest generation, there are people still affected by what it feels like to be mistakenly considered an enemy of their own country.
It was both prejudice, wartime hysteria, like they said, and failed leadership of our government leaders that sent us all into what we call America's concentration camps, which are different from Nazi concentration camps. Those were death camps that they were sent to. Ours was not like that. Ours was just being behind prison barbed wire fences with armed guards, making sure that no one escapes.
June Berk and Mas Yamashida are both survivors of internment camps. June Berk is a California native.
I was born in Hollywood, went to Dayton Heights Grammar School in Hollywood, and lived a pretty normal life. I didn't feel any special prejudice against us as children. But later on, when I grew up, I read all these things that were said in the newspapers, that were said by politicians and different people.
An American naval base in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, was pummeled by a surprise attack by the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service. It happened before 8 a.m. on December 7, 1941. 2,403 Americans, sailors, soldiers, and civilian personnel died that day.
December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
At the time, the United States was still claiming neutrality in World War II, but the attack launched them into the fight.
I ask that the Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
I was 6 when the war broke out.
I was 10 years old when December 7th happened, the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Immediately, all Japanese were fired, even from the studios, government jobs, and also students who were going to UCLA or USC could not go back to school. And then they set up a curfew area where we could no longer travel more than 5 miles from our home, and we had to be at home by 7:30. And this law was fought all the way up to the Supreme Court, but they ruled that in wartime, the Army has the right to do this. So they lost the case in the Supreme Court. Because they couldn't travel more than 5 miles, a lot of families moved in together. And because everybody was fired and didn't have jobs, they also started using their savings. And the savings were being depleted when Executive Order 9066 came into being, and we were all forced to leave our homes.
This evacuation of the Japanese has been ordered by the Army.
Presidential Executive Order 9066 was signed by President Franklin D. Roosevelt. It authorized the forced removal of people with Japanese ancestry living on the West Coast to what the government called relocation centers. The camps were not finished yet, so the government used places normally only fit for animals to serve as Japanese detention centers.
Japanese living here in Southern California, they were taken to Santa Anita, which is a racetrack, and the Pomona Fairgrounds. We were living up in Oakland, Northern California, and the people living up in Northern California, we were taken to Tanfran, which was a racetrack. There were these posters that were put up all over the West Coast. The one that went in your neighborhood told you to report to such and such a place. So to make sure, once the order came out, that there won't be any demonstrations or resistance, the FBI rounded up what they considered community leaders, Japanese community leaders, and took them away.
Berk remembers the day she learned her family would be forced to move.
My sister and I were walking home from a movie, and she started seeing these signs on the telephone post that said, Japanese in this area have to be out of here by a certain date. It was for us, it was May 7th, which gave us about a week to get rid of all of our belongings. And my sister went home, and I remember her yelling at my parents. She was saying, you were born in Japan, so you have to go to camp. But I am a United States citizen. I just took a class in constitutional rights, and they can't do this to American citizens. My mother said to her, well, who's going to take care of us in camp? And who's going to take care of you out here by yourself? So my sister said, yeah, right, I'll go to camp with you.
Berk's family, along with many others, were moved to the Santa Anita racetrack.
They gave us a tag with a number on it. And they said to us, this is your number. This is your family number. Our number was like 3407. And they said, for the rest of the time you are here in Santa Anita or wherever you go, you don't use your family name. You use your number. And so immediately you lose your identity like that. No one could take pets into the camps with them. And that was a really tragic, sad thing for a child. Then they told us, go over to that haystack and fill your pillow with straw. So we put the hay and pillow, and then we dragged it up the road. And then they said, well, this one here, barn 54, is the horse stall where you're going to live.
We didn't have mattresses. We had to stuff these bags with straw and hay, and that's what we slept on. Because I can remember it being so dusty in these stalls.
My mother, my father, and I slept in the back part of the horse stall, where I guess the horses would be. And then the front part, which we called our living room, was my brother's bed and my sister's bed. That's probably where they kept the hay for the horses to eat. At night, they would, in Santa Anita, they would have bed checks, and we had to all be in our bed, and they put a flashlight in our face and make sure you're in your bed. And then it's lights out for the whole camp. And then they had searchlights going all around the camp to make sure that no one's trying to escape. I thought, well, this is what happens when you're in camp, when you're in a prison. Right now, they use it for the horse receiving barn before they go out on the races. But in the wartime days, this whole large room was shower faucets. They put a plyboard inside this huge room, and half of the room was for women and half of the room was for men. And just this plywood board separating us. And everybody was assigned to eat at a certain mess hall. There were 6 mess halls. The red mess hall was in the grandstand, where we had classes, where we had programs, where we had school. Really nice, beautiful. The other mess halls were all in the barrack, which was okay. And then the blue mess hall was in the stables, which had horseflies and stuff. I remember once my father got really angry. He had a hot temper, and he stood up and he told this waitress, "You put on a hairnet or a scarf because your hair can get in my food." So we thought, my God, here's this horrible conditions that we're living in, and he's worried about a hairnet for a girl.
Berk says her parents and other adults were careful not to fill the children with fear.
They always remained calm. I don't know how they felt when they went with us, but there's a Japanese saying that says "kodomo no tame ni," and that means for the sake of the children. They wanted to make sure that all the children grew up in a normal, happy surroundings. So we had libraries and books in schools. The elders all printed newspapers, make sure that we all knew what was everybody knew what was going on, and also set up softball leagues, baseball leagues, basketball for both boys and girls, and Cub Scouts, and all the normal things, activities that children do. As a second generation born here in Los Angeles, I feel really indebted to our Issei, we call it first generation Issei, the immigrants, our parents. They kept telling Japan, don't go to war with the United States, because Japan is like our mother and father, and we were born there. So our parents are still there, but our children are born here in America. So it's like asking you to choose between a mother and a father. And they begged Japan not to go to war with the United States. Well, that didn't work.
After about 6 months at the racetrack, Yamashida's family was moved to the Topaz internment camp in Utah.
They put us on trains. I remember that because I'd never been on a train before. They covered up the windows with black paper or black cloth or something. I didn't know why they didn't want us to look out. They didn't want people to see us. I don't know. So in each car, there was a soldier with a rifle, and they had bayonets on the, I remember that. They had bayonets on the rifle. Anyway, very intimidating. And so our block was block 13. I tell people, you'll never forget your block number, because there were no trees, nothing to block the wind. So we used to get dust storms all the time, and you couldn't keep the dust, sand out of the rooms.
Berk's family was moved from the racetrack to another internment camp in Roanoke, Arkansas.
They always emphasize, oh, look how much fun you're going to have. You're going to go on a train ride. You're going to go on a bus ride. And I get, oh, I've never been on a train before. I've never been on a big bus before. So it was all a new adventure for me. And I remember it as that because, again, they didn't want to put fear in children's minds. They wanted us to feel safe and comfortable. But I also saw poverty in Arkansas and Jim Crow. My father rode on a bus and he was told to sit with the white people, and he couldn't sit in the back of the bus. And he came back to camp saying, I'm an enemy alien. I should be in jail, and yet they treat me better than they treat the people who live here. He thought it was incredible that was going on in the United States. He never saw that before in his life.
She recalls why many school-age children took on Americanized names and how it had lasting generational effects.
The teachers were from Oklahoma, Arkansas, Mississippi, Louisiana, so they all had the Southern drawl. To hear them try to pronounce Japanese name with a Southern drawl, all of us kids would sit there and we just laugh. We would just, oh my God, she's murdering our names, So I think that's when a lot of us started using our American names. Like I changed my name to June because they couldn't pronounce my Japanese name, Yasuno.
And in the relocation centers, life goes on. From kindergarten up, it's an all-American course for these youngsters.
Oh, they outlawed Japanese schools in the camps. Us kids were going, yay, we don't have to go to Japanese school, good. I always spoke Japanese in my home to my parents and to my elders. I always spoke Japanese. But as I grew up and I had children, I didn't speak Japanese in my home. It was all English. So I think a lot of culture was lost in that. The third generation didn't have the opportunity to learn Japanese unless they were sent to a Japanese school where they were taught the Japanese language. But most of us didn't do that. And so there was sort of a loss of a culture there, I think. But strangely enough, while the Army said you can't have Japanese language schools, they also said, for the sake of the elderly people, we can perform Japanese dances, we can put on Japanese plays, and we could sing Japanese songs. So a lot of the young girls like my age, we all took up Japanese dancing, and we took up kabuki and playing the shamisen like a fiddle and learning how to sing Japanese songs. There were some happy stories to come out of our misery. My sister worked in one of the mess halls, and she was always late because she could never get herself ready to get to the mess hall in time. But this young man started asking her for a date, and they dated in camp, and she was just a senior in high school, and he was a college student. They both went to two separate concentration camps. He went to Amachi. My sister and I, our family, went to Aurora, Arkansas. So they corresponded every day, and they finally married.
Yamashida's family was incarcerated in the Topaz camp for almost 4 years.
When the war ended and we were released, they gave each person $25 and a bus ticket or a train ticket wherever you were going.
With the $225 total that the U.S. government gave Yamashita, his parents, and siblings, the family did not return to California. They settled in Salt Lake City. He says it was a culture shock after being held at a camp where everyone was of the same heritage.
Hollywood was making these war pictures, and the Japanese were always the bad guys, right?
If the gods are kind, I will be in the White House when Japan dictates her terms of peace.
So I became aware of being Japanese.
By VE Day, Victory in Europe Day, which honors the day the Allies accepted Germany's surrender, May 8, 1945, Berk and her family were freed. She remembers how she felt on VJ Day, the day marking victory over Japan.
I was living in Denver. On VJ Day, there's such a sense of relief that the war is over. We all said at that time, it's the end of all wars. Unfortunately, it wasn't. But somehow we have to keep saying no more war, no more violence.
Between 1942 and 1945, there were 10 internment camps holding American citizens of Japanese descent. About 120,000 people were detained against their will. Berk hopes America has learned its lesson.
We have to learn from past mistakes. We have to learn not to teach our kids to hate. Have them feel tenderness and kindness to one another. I think that's so important. The only way we can do that is how we treat one another. Race or color or ethnicity doesn't come into that. That's universal.
The internment camps had lasting economic effects. Those incarcerated lost an estimated $400 million in property during the war. In 1948, Congress provided just $38 million in reparations to survivors of the camps.
You have to remember there were 120,000 different stories, and so mine is just one. So if you talk the age groups between 10 and 13, all we remember is having fun in camp. It's the older people, 19, 20 years old, who wanted to have a college education and were denied, or trying to get a work and were denied, and they struggled differently.
My fellow Americans, we gather here today to right a grave wrong.
President Ronald Reagan issued a formal apology to Japanese Americans in 1988. With the passage of the Civil Liberties Act that same year, cash payments of $20,000 were given to each surviving Japanese American who was a U.S. citizen or legal resident at the time of their internment.
I'm just hoping that our political leadership will recognize the pain of separating people from each other, and also from parents, from children.
Despite how the U.S. treated her family and so many others, Berk says she is still proud to be an American.
I think there's a sense of being proud to be an American, and hopefully that this never happens again to any other group. And that's why we try to tell our stories.
I'm TC Newman for Inside Edition Digital.